Welcome to the Squat Plug, episode 41. On today's episode, we are joined by Sean Muir, former president of IPF Australia, aka APU. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure's ours to have you on board. So, talk to us about becoming president of the APU. How did that all take place? You know, you're powerlifter beforehand. How did that progression occur?
I was a powerlifter from the late 90s until right through till the formation of APU. But the APU was sort of a situation which was created by, unfortunately, disparaged uh, or disparity between the International Powerlifting Federation and the existing organisation, which was Powerlifting Australia. Powerlifting Australia, unfortunately, was removed from the IPF in around, I believe it was in the AGM in that year. I was not even aware of any dramas that was going on until the last minute. And that was virtually at the AGM where I got advised that something was going to happen with Powerlifting Australia.
And when did this take place?
That took place, I believe, at the AGM, wherever the AGM was with the IPF.
What year, if I may ask roughly?
17, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, okay. That's consistent with what I've seen on Reddit as well.
Yeah.
If I serves correctly, we're looking at Wilkes and that whole
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. So the situation wasn't good from what I heard. However, I did find out that there was a group of people who were forming a new federation in Australia. So I wasn't their first choice. And I do believe, however, that those group of people, the situation didn't eventuate, obviously. It didn't happen. Something went wrong. And then I got the phone call requesting that we form something as fast as we could. Now, this didn't happen until after the existing federation was removed from IPF. So I was sort of like, I guess I was the second choice, maybe. So I wasn't their favourite. So there was nothing in there. And to me, the situation was, for the lifters themselves, I wanted to do everything right. Being a lifter, I held no executive position in any of the state bodies. I did run my own business. I have been on committees before in Townsville where I was at the time, where I was prior to that time. However, and been in companies as such, but never in a situation where all of a sudden we had to form a whole sporting organisation at the drop of a hat.
And how's that experience like fresh on the heels of the Wilkes controversy? For the people in the audience who aren't familiar, Wilkes was indeed quite a controversial figure in the IPF. I can't really get into particulars and whatnot, but there's a whole lot of hearsay and speculation about some of the actions that him and his wife undertook during the time that he was in charge of the Australian affiliate. It's some pretty wild stuff. So how did it feel on your end?
It was kind of brutal because I for a person who thought I was just going to step into a position and help the lifters, I become a figure which was, sometimes it was very supported, but other times it was very controversial. I felt in the role that I was put in, there was a lot of pressure from outsiders to comply with what they wanted. That was it was a really tough job to do, because in one hand you wanted to comply and put regulations in to run the sport effectively, because in reality the IPF was supposed to stand for, or if you're an affiliate to the IPF, you're supposed to stand for the governance and the processes and transparency, and so you apply all that, but you've also got the pressures coming from clubs, of course. They want to make sure that they be able to run their competitions and make some sort of money out of it, which you've got to respect. And also you've got the IPF, which I sometimes question what their purpose is. Actually, I quite often
I think most of the powerlifting community right now is doing a whole lot of that questioning. So I understand, like based on the conversations I've had with other international affiliates, some of the more controversial locations, like in Korea, like out in Vietnam, in Mexico, and so on and so forth, that the dealings that the IPF affiliates typically have, unless they're like powerhouse locations, tend to be quite unfavorable towards those constituents. Like you're often overlooked. Starting a federation, anew, fresh with the coattails of the Wilkes controversies and whatnot. I can imagine it being a very tough process to undergo, and I can't imagine providing the support that they needed to and whatnot. What was it like? Like dealing with these people, dealing with Gaston Perage, and dealing with, whatchamacallit, what's his name again? The U.S. Keller.
At the beginning, felt because I guess I provided them with what they needed, and that was somebody removed. But after the dust had settled, I felt like I guess I was being treated like a puppet. And regardless of what I did, they weren't happy with it unless it was done their way. There was no autonomy. There was a lot of interference in the way we operated in Australia. We operated under a couple of guidelines, of course, the IPF guidelines, but we also have our national guidelines through the Australian Sports Commission. And some of them, especially during the period, because most of the existence of APU was during the COVID period. That was really tough for us because Australia had really strong restrictions, and we couldn't send people overseas. We couldn't travel interstate, I should say. So it was a really tough way. So we tried to implement ways that we can continue to keep the athletes participating.
So for the audience out there, just so they can better understand exactly the extent of these restrictions and how they impact the lifting. Let's just say, I guess, like you live in Wyoming or like someplace like, I don't know, like Montana. In Australia, during this time, you weren't allowed to go from one place to the other. And during this time, essentially, you guys are trying to run like national meets and all that kind of stuff while not being able to get people to meet at a certain location, or like, because it's impossible. It's legally impossible. So these are the constraints that they were faced with during the time. And how was that like? What were some of the creative, I guess, like measures you tried to undertake to work around that?
We ended up doing a kind of like an online meet, which
Interesting.
we tried to use the same equipment in each state because there is some variance in some of the equipment. Even the IPF approved equipment has some differences in it. That was a tough one. The refereeing standards have to be at national level for a national championships. So we're flexible on that to try to at least get one national referee in that area that can overlook the whole lot. It did eventuate. We did get the nationals up. So that was uh, one of the hard parts of getting our sport, keeping our sport going during that period.
What was the IPS response to this, if I may ask, for these measures?
Any of those measures were always scrutinised because at the end of the nationals, we needed to send they wanted us, I should say, to send a team to an international event in Asia, the Asian Championships. We had trouble getting referees. Some states did have borders that would open up to other states, some other states. So what we did is we moved some people around those states so they could transfer between two states, but they weren't allowed to, for instance, go to Western Australia. Some people from Queensland weren't allowed to go to Northern Territory. So we just sort of done a little bit of moving around with the referees and had different weekends. And then the IPF got on to us and wanted us to send a team to Hong Kong, and we were still had restrictions in Australia.
So ridiculous. Like they're just like they're denying reality. This is stuff outside of your control. Like, so what was the rationale?
The rationale was it was hard
There
to
wasn't one.
fathom. Not really. Really, anything that we spoke to, in particular Gaston about, I don't think he understood that the IPF policies didn't prevail over government policies. I just don't. And unfortunately, that's the way it works. He might have thought they did. I'm not sure, but they
King
didn't.
Gaston.
Yeah. So, so it was a very tough venture to go through. And eventually, of course, in around 2 years ago, we decided what I couldn't believe that we would even come to that at the beginning of running, running APU. There was no time leading up to running the APU, or even in the first 12 months, where I would have thought, hey, we're sick of this mob. And we did. We got sick of them. In all honesty, I I'm surprised that not many others have done the same thing because
As
we
am I.
voted.
But there's a whole lot of blackmail, it seems. Like, well, not like blackmail, just like threats and coercion afoot. I was speaking to some people out in Croatia recently who are very disenchanted with IPF and whatnot, and they're trying to start like their own, like, USAPL affiliate and that kind of stuff. And they've already been told that even if they begin the process of doing that, everybody involved is going to be banned from powerlifting, the IPF affiliates over there immediately. So it's like, there's no democracy here. The whole process itself is very draconian. And so these measures and whatnot, like basically they leave people feeling left out. And unfortunately, what happens with powerlifters is they like to be where the competition's at. And where the competition's at is where, like, people strive to be an international platform, to make it to worlds and so on and so forth. So basically find that basically they essentially drive the decisions that these people make, despite the fact that they're dealing with, like being, I want to say, neglected, being undermined, and all these things turn, turn after turn. And you just hear these stories. I'm like thinking to myself, like, why are you working with these people? There's no benefit in this for you, but IPF Worlds.
Yeah, it's that big shiny thing that the pikefish is looking for. As soon as they see the shiny thing, they chase it. Change takes a big movement. You're going to lose something at the beginning, and we knew we were going to lose something at the beginning. And after 20, I think we just mentioned it before, 30 years in the sport, I really seen more. There was a lot of accumulating concerns that I developed over the years watching the IPF's decision-making process. But eventually, like I was getting phone calls very early in the morning. One of the examples is we had a competition, national championships, at a place called Talabudgera. And halfway through the competition, it was on an indoor sports centre, so it had a timber floor. And in Australia, that's most of our buildings around Australia that are going to run powerlifting competitions or accept powerlifting competitions are probably going to have timber floors. So halfway through the competition, the venue manager came out and said, if anybody drops another weight on the floor, this is a national championships, I'm kicking you out. And I've gone, oh shit. But they were excessive. Yeah, the modern lifters love dumping the bar harder on the ground. So it was quite kind of a case of, hey, just put the bar down normally without having to let it go. So I went out and I told all the lifters that you got to put the bar down. Some of them were warming up with 70 kilos and letting it go from their hands. So it was just a little bit, it was a very easy fix. And in Australia, in the years that I've been in the sport, it was always a case of the bar had to be controlled to the floor. And I know things have changed. However, the rule hasn't. And, so I put that rule in so we could get venues because we just have no venues here in Australia. And it was a case of putting the bar down. It wasn't going to be like put it down on feathers or anything like that, but it was going to be place it down. And the uproar was pretty bad. And then next minute I got a phone call from Gaston telling me that I'm not allowed to make up rules. And this is at 6 o'clock in the morning. It was abusive. It was it was in front of my family, in front of my kids. Abusive. It was like a crazy man.
Oh, he's like
The
yelling at you,
attitude.
shouting at you.
He was
What?
shouting. And believe it or not, Keller was there, and he was actually supporting me. He was saying, "Oh, he's right." But Gaston just lost the plot. Anyway, I find out later that it was because as the federation grew, what happened was a lot of people that were, you know, pretty probably angry with me for starting a new federation. I think they believed that I was in there trying to remove somebody from the IPF prior to the APU starting, but it's far from the case. I wasn't even involved. I was a second string. So I find out later that Gaston has been contacting members of the APU, getting information. What I believe, this is only my belief, but that they were undermining the organisation by contacting members and virtually white anting, I guess. Would you call it white anting or just planting seeds in so people would maybe vote us out at the next election, which would have been fine had it been done properly.
And who did he want in your stead?
There was a particular lifter, I won't say a name, but he made contact with two lifters who were very remorseful of APU starting. And it was very weird that, still there? Sorry, dropped out for a second there. It was very
I lost you for
weird
a
that
second. Okay.
Gaston would contact, it's in the minutes of the AG, of their General Assembly, but it was very strange that he contacted one particular person who wouldn't join the IPF after we started APU and had kind of a beef with particular directors of the IPF, and the other person who left the IPF and was a member of another organisation. It really it felt at the end towards like there was this conspiracy or this under this plotting to find out, because maybe after maybe the third year, I probably started speaking out against out to Gaston and being a little bit more assertive to him, because he was, that's what organisations are supposed to do, right? If you don't agree with someone, you speak up. That's what you're supposed to do. And
I
I done that.
understand he seems to be quite quite a bully in his dealings with people. At least he was. He's no longer part of the IPF after all. Like for his all his transgressions over the years, some shocking revelations come to light and whatnot. But so that he is very unprofessional in his conduct. He's known to undermine people. I've heard of his rapport with Gino, like the announcer, whatnot. Like you see, like like USAPL and that kind of stuff. And Gino's told me some stories about his run-ins with Gaston, as of other USAPL heads who worked alongside of Gaston over the years. He's a piece of shit. Like actually, like a bad fucking person. In every way. He's
To just be
disrespectful.
blunt, I
Like
guess.
legit. Like he's a piece of shit. So it's unbecoming behavior of somebody who's the IPF president for a federation that has pretensions of one day joining the Olympics and that kind of stuff. And frankly, so long as people like him are in charge of that, that's never going to happen.
The gentleman, I've been at many of the General Assemblies, I should say, and I did note in the last one that I went to, and the gentleman who come across from, who's virtually got a big, will give the IPF a big boost into the Olympics if and when they're ready. Gaston started talking about the Olympics, and I could see the hesitation in this fellow's voice. And it was virtually, he eventually said what I thought he was going to say, was virtually, hold your horses. You got to do all these things first. And you can't just talk about, just because you got this Olympic, I forget what they call it, it's not being an Olympic sport, but it's Olympic recognition or something. Doesn't mean anything. It means you got to comply with these things. And there's a big, big step. Yeah, I can't see it happen. I can't see it happening, but I'll probably go against a few dreamers that want to see it happen. But yeah, good luck to them.
I mean, like weightlifting as it is right now, which is an actual Olympic sport, has been talked about in the years, past whatnot, to potentially be removed from the Olympics, outright, because of all the violations and whatnot and testing and that kind of stuff. How many positives there've been out there, and just like flagrant violations, or like overall. Now, this is something which has been around for a while, and whose systems for testing and whatnot have been very well developed compared to powerlifting. I can't imagine what would happen if powerlifting joined the Olympics.
Goodness.
Testing stuff is concerned and all the issues like they would encounter in the Olympics. So, and considering that and looking at the IPF's track record when it comes to testing or the lack thereof, what are they thinking? You don't do testing. How are you expecting to join the Olympics if another, I want to say, a sister sport, weightlifting, whatnot, is having issues for the same shit you're not enforcing right now? It makes no sense.
One of the when we first started, there was always a concern about testing. So we developed a system which provided a levy for lifters. And I think they do the same in US. Larry might have helped me out with this one, if I'm not mistaken. And we arranged for competitions as an organisation that was run by a person who could speak up to the IPF. And so we had state championships tested. We didn't really get too many local comps tested, but we got state championships tested and national championships tested. And that's just part of the proper processes to an organisation that isn't run off like a puppet regime. And I use the word puppet regime because I realised this after somebody else mentioned that that's how the IPF might want to work. Now that the IPF has got a new federation, testing may not happen. It may happen at national level, but what's the point of that? If you're only going to test at one competition, it's like planning to go to the Worlds. If you're only going to get tested at the Worlds, you might as well not test. Testing has to be random. It has to be surprise sometimes. If you don't do it that way, especially the modern technology that people use these days, athletes can use these days, microdosing is easy. If you know when you're going to get tested, even microdosing with the three strike rule is.
Yeah. So for people who are not familiar with the three-strike rule, when the out of meet testers hit you up and they tell you it's time to get tested, you can tell them that you're not available to test, and you can do that up to 3 times before you're suspended. So imagine the first time you're full blast on cycle and whatnot. Oh, look, I'm out of town. I'm out of the country. I flew out to whatever place and so on and so forth. Or you just don't answer your phone. The Jamaican team, a sprinting team, was actually known to do this quite a bit. So what they would do is like people would ask them where they're at to do
Thought you were
the
gonna say the bobsled team.
no, not the Bobs. So they'd ask them where they're at, and their trainers would say, "Oh, they're out in the mountains training. They didn't take their phones with them. They're not going to be back for a couple of weeks." And lo and behold, the entire team, with the exception of Usain Bolt, ended up popping positive. These little things, and so this also extends to IPF and extends to other strength sports. So just it's incredibly problematic, man. For all intents and purposes, you could be blasting all year round.
Yeah, we have a local meet director in our region who loves to share the data on his Instagram story, particularly the lack of data, particularly from like Powerlifting America and all these top lifters who go to IPF Worlds. And like, yes, some of them are getting out of me tested, but it's happening so infrequently. It's like every couple year. Like there's some that haven't gotten tested since 2023. It's like, okay, so you're not gonna, it has to happen, like you said, randomly and by surprise, but it also has to happen somewhat frequently as well, you know?
Looking at the numbers that Eric puts out there, apparently USAPL, about 10 to 12% of USAPL lifters are tested. Comparatively speaking, Powerlifting America, which is the USAPL, United States IPF affiliate, it's about 2%.
But it's not
That's
WADA,
right.
so it doesn't count.
But the
It's a
12% isn't
joke.
WADA, so it doesn't count.
There was one instance of, speaking of out of competition testing, in Australia, we got all our Pacific Islands, and it wasn't powerlifting, it was Olympic weightlifting. One of the athletes, maybe they were finding a system and a way to watch to see if, at the time it was called the Australian Sports Anti-Doping Agency, ASADA, or ASDA, I should say it was called. They'd only have one flight a week going from Australia to Fiji. So they'd watch that flight. They could be at the airport and watching the people deboard. So ASADA or ASDA got a little bit smart, and they decided to fly to New Zealand first, and you get on the New Zealand flight the next day and fly over to Fiji. It's still a report on Google, and caught her by surprise. And she tried to run away, and she jumped in a car. And she actually ran over in a car. She ran over the drug DCO, the drug control officer.
Holy crap!
So she ended up getting suspended, but because she tried to escape and she ran him over, so the poor bugger's on compensation, poor fella. So yeah, that's just watching an aeroplane. You're in those regional areas, you can see what's coming in and what's going out. So yeah, testing is really it's very hard to rely on such a big system because they're not going to be able to do something in your own hometown for testing. They can't just set a lab up in every single town that there's a powerlifter. Anyway,
So it just makes it very easy for people to evade testing and to go ahead and basically put up an unfair advantage towards other people, and whatnot. And you see this happening somebody like other countries. Like I made a story post recently talking about how local meets, you shouldn't be allowed to, I guess, like to make world records and that kind of stuff. Which, but what happens? Some of the untested meets, whatever. And one of the stories is that in Iran, there's some people out there trying to claim world records and so on and so forth, and the very plates that they use in these competitions may indeed be fake. Yeah, and apparently this is also taking place out in Russia. And there's like some speculation that Mariana, who's like the top female lifter of all time, whatnot, had that same thing taking place. Yes,
fake weights.
yes,
Look
fake
at this.
weights and like terrible officiating and that kind of stuff. She's basically being blessed, by the local federation and whatnot, just so they can put records on the map.
Fake weights is another level.
It is.
Like,
It
That's
is.
pretty good.
But,
Anatoly
but
will pick that one up for sure. He's very popular over here, Anatoly.
yeah, we see him on YouTube over here as well.
He's good
He's out
value.
to like cleaning the gym and like deadlifting 585 pounds. It's
I
it's
like when
pretty
he dresses
amusing.
up as an old man. It makes me feel more comfortable.
You can relate.
I can
That's
relate,
me in about 5 years.
except he lifts a hell of a lot more.
He's a strong dude. Let's talk about maybe I guess like some of the more recent stuff I guess that are occurring like Article 14 and that kind of stuff. Like, what's your take on it? Like, how's it implemented in Australia during that time, if you implemented it at all, if I may ask,
Um,
and how's it being implemented nowadays, if you're familiar?
Yeah. Article 14, I wrote a 2020 South Africa World Championships. I, I put in a motion in regards to the Article 14 to apply for clarity on the meaning of it. So rather than attack the Article 14, because it's written in a way that it can be screwed around.
Yeah.
You can interpret it however you want to. Like
It's
meets,
very
you know,
vague.
like meets, like events, like anything pretty much, and it goes from like top to bottom. You could be a lifter, you could be a coach, you could be like like a presenter and whatnot. Just somebody like an announcer, and you can get Article 14. Anybody who has anything to do with the sport or any other sport or any other like federation to any capacity could be Article 14.
It's like concise enough for them to be able to ban people, but it's like vague enough that they could just interpret it and play favorites how they want. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, the wording was wrong because they've got uh, national can mean a couple of different things. I wanted clarity on that so we could put that interpretation in the next General Assembly and try to change it. One of the issues I have with it is that it's a human rights violation. Excluding anybody from participating in an organisation is a human rights breach, and really the IPF is not entitled to be able to apply that. I mean, none of us really get paid. Sheffield, yes, they're getting a little bit of money now, but it's not like this is a professional sport for 99.9% of us. So I just wait for somebody to apply human rights. Plus, there's probably a few other legal issues, but the human rights is the big one. You just can't stop somebody from association with anybody.
IPF likes to treat people like chattel, like basically like essentially like servants, and they're indentured service, and like they belong to them. Unfortunately for the IPF, in court, these arguments do not hold up. We look at the Franzo case here in the United States between IPF and whatchamacallit, with INZR and so on and so forth. IPF stopped having competitions in the United States for a good long while until they worked out a behind the scenes arrangement with INZR, where INZR all of a sudden was a sponsor for all their meets, and I don't even know if they paid for those meets. Like that was part of the arrangement. You're looking at in Europe, whatnot, there's a, I think, water polo team which decided to compete in another event which is not affiliated to the main water polo federation, whatnot. And so that federation decided to essentially Article 14 them, and found out an EU court found against that federation, so you couldn't stop it. The Super League in soccer and football and whatnot, they had the same thing taking place. They were told by FIFA that they could not take the athletes who belong to Champions League, the FIFA teams, and have them be part of the Super League. And then Super League took them to court, and after basically being wiped out of existence because Super League no longer exists, the court found for Super League, you do not own these people. They're allowed to do what they want to do. And people are saying, maybe like, like it's something that basically as the Federation of Sport grows, that should be enforced. Deion Sanders here in America played football and played baseball for major league teams at the same time, and there was no restrictions there. So if MLB and NFL aren't doing this kind of stuff, who the hell is the IPF to do this shit? It's bonkers. It's just a controlling measure, and there's no legal standing that exists to promote that stuff, because it is monopolistic. It is anti-sport
and anti-competitive. And that email that I sent got lost. It didn't make it to the General Assembly.
So we've heard that happen many times. Speaking to Danny Kim out of South Korea, many of his messages that were supposed to be sent to the IPF court, quote unquote, that existed out there would just disappear. He'd be told one thing by Gaston Parage, he'd be told something else by Keller, and he'd be told something else by the Asian president, who, by the way, is also involved in some very controversial stuff. One of his lifters at IPF Worlds back in 2021, Amir, was essentially threatened by him and by other members of the Iranian team and whatnot to wear a shirt of an assassinated Iranian general, very controversial person, so on and so forth, and under duress, such that basically if he didn't do so, his family would be harmed back home. And so these people out over there basically are who members of the IPF are referring to help out these matters, and they just don't give a crap. Legit, these things get conveniently lost all the time. The communication is conveniently conflicting. It's just gaslighting and just I want to say brushing on the rug, and just basically neglecting people until they hope these situations go away. And then when it comes out to something to actually take action on, it happens once a year at the AGM, if then. It's insane. It's a very
Yeah.
regressive system.
Yeah. 30 years. What was I doing?
So, sorry, go ahead.
But yeah, I've connected with good people. I must admit that over most of those years, the most recent wasn't so pleasant, and I was still Sean, but I put this name President above me, and then all of a sudden I become a target.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the end of your time with the IPF. What exactly took place there, and what precipitated it? Because I was looking at, like, through the annals of history, and Sean Muir was a very respected individual in the community for a good long while, until 2023 took place with the Kelly Mann Tribunal. If you'd
The
like to
Kelly,
enlighten us.
yeah, the Kelly man, that was an incident in a coaching course. There's a lot of reluctance in, uh, I guess I don't want to call it. I don't want to call it what it's not, but I'll say what I think it is. I think there was a lot of egoism, and that's the sport, and I respect that. But we also got some, as I was saying before, we're working with the Australian Sports Commission, Sport Integrity Australia, all the organisations that's based here in Australia. To be a recognised sport the probably the goal that we most sports look for. So there's a number of sports. It's like being Olympic sport. As soon as you're Olympic sport, you're a recognised sport in Australia. We were striving towards becoming a recognised sport in Australia. And part of that recognition process was that we must have frameworks in place for our education. All coaches must you must provide a coaching course for all coaches. Um, there's a lot of things. There's even pathways, drug testing. The importance of it is if you do get recognised as a sport in Australia, your drug testing is paid for by the government, which is just incredible and important, especially with our sport, because we are the sport of strength. And if you're going to say you're drug free or drug tested, well, you really got to have those in place, especially at that level. So we put the course on. There was reluctance, and I understand. I really admired, previous management, and the previous course that was done that was developed in around about maybe in the mid-90s. So it was really not a course that was applicable to today's modern lifting. For instance, there was no such thing as classic lifting. It was equipped. We had suits, we had knee wraps. Even I was probably doing a course back in the late 90s or early millennia that was outdated, and we were still doing the same one. So we developed a new course that brought in um, a lot more of the new research. We didn't really want to go too much into philosophies in training programs. We did want to brief on it because I think, to me, that's somebody's personal, but we did go through the basics, especially with first aid. Sorry, not first aid, with making sure that you don't need first aid. So putting safety policies in place. During the course, it was very clear that a particular few people didn't want to be there. But I just sort of wanted to sort of advise them that this is really something that I just want to make sure that we tick the box so we can get recognition through the Australian Sports Commission. And you know what? 2 days of listening to me, maybe I'll have one or two things that they didn't know. Maybe. I can't confirm that, but maybe they knew everything. I'm not sure. During the course, there was a few complaints. Sorry, after the course, there was a couple of complaints in regards to the behaviour because it was atrocious and it was disrespectful. But
I mean, what took place? What happened?
just people just talking about how they probably knew more than me. There was instances where some sort of heckling went on, and it was to know it wasn't a personal thing, but it was disrespectful for the organisation. I said something, and I stuck up for the IPF, and probably regret it now. But I stood up for the IPF because the IPF made this rule, which I think is kind of, even I looked and went, that's stupid. But, as an athlete and a coach, I'm just going to say, it is what it is. Just follow it until the same shit changes in a couple of years' time, because I've seen it happen before. In 9 or 2000, when I went to the Worlds, I had to vote for a rule. What would you call it? A retraction of a rule. The rule was that if a disabled lifter was to enter the platform in a bench press competition with walking aids, that disabled lifter must drop those walking aids before he gets onto the platform. He's not allowed to bring him onto the platform. So he had to crawl on, whoever this was. That was a rule that was applied, and it was voted for, that they must drop the sticks down before they made their first step on a platform. The following year, the IPF was sued.
Yeah,
How on
not
brand.
surprised. Yeah.
So this sort of shit turns around. So yes, I'm not going to be a mouth, because all I think is sometimes, surely this shit's going to turn around. Sometimes it doesn't. Now, the following year, that was the first Worlds I went to, and I went into the General Assembly, and I've looked at the what the agenda was. I said, what's this rule? And so it must have been 2 years later, because at the Worlds in New Zealand, because they had the World Championships in New Zealand, somebody actually sued the IPF because they couldn't get onto the platform because they couldn't walk.
Who would have thought that would happen? Who could have seen this happen?
Well, this is what happens in these, and that's the mentality is really that you're always going to get it, but it's dominant in the IPF, and it just keeps on happening, the same thing. So I had to vote, and I've went. So of course we voted, and because they got sued, they sort of like had their bottom lip dropped. All right, we have to change this rule because we got sued. So they sued it, and lo and behold, disabled people could get onto the bench press, walk across to the bench press with their walking sticks instead of crawling and looking. The poor buggers already
Foolish.
had the hardest life than any of us, and they have to crawl onto a platform. So, but so these sort of things go on. So the bench press rule. So the bench press rule was there was a call out that was really rude about the bench press rule, but there was also just a few other things with money, paying for the course, how much of it was a rip off. So a lot of negative behaviours. A number of those participants in that competition, in that coaching course, sorry, I'll only say only the ones that were actually part of that group were restricted on their coaching levels until 12 months, because their behaviour just did not set a standard that what a professional coach should be. A professional coach won't walk into any place and heckle the instructor. That's
True,
just
true.
not. I might be a little bit old now, but I've always given respect to people. For instance, Larry, I'd always respect Larry. I've known him for many years. I'd always respect that. Les Wellington, the fellow who introduced me into the sport. But it didn't happen. So the board eventually, who come down and said, look, they're okay to coach, but they just won't be able to coach at the World Championships, and maybe one of them for the World Championships, for the National Championships, I should say. So that caused a big stink, and then they challenged it. They also, there was a few people who wrote complaints in about their behaviour, which eventually went to a court. And so the court eventually took place before the World Championships and firstly said, yes, you're right. The way you applied this was correct, and what you applied was correct. So, of course, that didn't sit real well. Then the IPF, here's the IPF rules, where lifters can just change countries. I don't know how. But you talk about drug issues. We got people that were living in Australia but representing New Zealand, for instance. I don't know how that works, but because they're never going to get drug tested while they're living over here. We're not paying for their drug testing. So instead of coaching for Australia, one of the coaches tried to coach for USA, and they needed permission from us. And the board had already decided that we weren't going to approve that girl as a coach. So yeah, I guess what happened was we applied some policies that people used the power of the people to resist our or to return serve, I guess, what we applied. So it is what it is, and yeah, we done everything right, we believe. So
So it, so as we understand over here, like, because the people listening might be wondering exactly who this was and whatnot, and I think it's in public record. It can be discussed. It took place between Kelly Mann and the APU at the time. So she was essentially suspended from coaching and that kind of stuff at a national, international level, from what I understand. Then she took it to the Australian Sports Tribunal, who actually found for the APU. They found that indeed her behavior was what was correctly, I would say, reprimanded by the APU for what she had done and whatnot, what her and I guess like the people I guess in her group had done. I'm not too familiar with exactly what took place over there, but I'm hearing what you're saying over here, and it does lend some more context to a very controversial situation here, which we've heard over like overseas here in the states and whatnot. Just we haven't heard the other side of the story. Kelly Mann is somebody who's a very respectable coach, and I respect her myself, and so do people in the community and whatnot. But there are times, I guess, when maybe I guess like people I guess like have oversights in the way they behave and that kind of stuff. I'm not excluded from that. I've had my share of missteps. I think as human beings, we mess up, you know? So now I'm seeing basically there's a doubling down over here and basically like a little back and forth. So after everything's said and done, what ends up happening is, from what I understand, lifters from the APU defect, they leave, and it ends up shutting down and becoming, they go over to USAPL Australia, they go over to New Zealand, they go over to America, that kind of stuff. What ends up being the fallout in the APU during your last days as the APU president?
as they are still running an organisation prior to it was directly after the General Assembly, when we um, one thing I mentioned is what you were saying before about nobody's perfect. Neither's Kelly, neither am I, neither is anyone in the world. However, being accountable is the most important aspect. And I'm learning that accountability, sometimes people are allergic to it. And it seems that the way to dodge accountability is by getting more people on your side. I really struggle with trying to understand that anybody in a position of that I was put in, I'm probably not there was no succession for me to come into, there was no succession for anyone in powerlifting in Australia for anybody to be able to take on the IPF. It was just jump in raw. It was really tough. So there was a lot of strong personalities, and my personality, I'm quiet, and that's my nature. But accountability is something that I really think is important for coaches and for athletes himself. Because if you're a coach, you can't hold accountability. You're going to blame you're going to blame other people for your athlete's mistakes. Your athlete has to take that accountability as well. In 2024, I think it was, after a meeting, we felt there was a group of people who were all sponsored by the same company, and contacts with them indicated to me that they had a chat group that was probably, from what I understand, conspiring for probably a change in management in powerlifting in Australia, which I was happy about because my job was to get in there for 4 years and then get out if I possibly can. However, this was a little bit more devilish. So we, after the AGM, which was a little bit of a pylon for the board that we had, which consisted of David Vaughan, who's got about maybe 45 years in the powerlifting game as an IPF as well, Maxi Bristow, Lynette, Scotty, myself, decided that this wasn't worth it anymore. And even one of the board members was so shooken up by the treatment of some of these members that he needed counselling. But it was that bad that um, really we were sort of shaking because it was just, I don't know if you've heard the term learned helplessness.
Yes.
That was us. No matter what we did in the sport, we become helpless because we just couldn't do anything that would be satisfied by them. We couldn't put a rule into place. We couldn't put anything to the to these members without being attacked back. So it was virtually a case of the whole board felt helpless.
So I'm
So we
actually
were
seeing this.
useless.
I'm seeing this happening with the USAPL right now. It's the same kind of dynamic. You find basically no matter what they do, they're in the wrong. The powerlifting America right now is the in federation, and no matter what takes place right now, the USAPL will be demonized. And I'm all for like being fair and whatnot. Like I think frankly, I guess like the situation with Kelly Mann perhaps could have been dealt with a little bit better. I think maybe I guess like maybe I guess like an aside conversation, something of that nature perhaps would have been the move. But I wasn't there. I don't know what you experienced or whatnot. I just know that basically when it comes down to situations like this, you want to be as tactful as possible, but not to find out that essentially, I guess you woke up the hornet's nest and you stirred the hornet's nest, and now it's attacking you, so on and so forth. You see this dynamic taking place here in the states, and what happens now? Facts go out the window. It becomes basically an all-out assault on on this federation, on this body, on this group of people. You see it happen over here with USPA as well. Many allegations that came out with this guy Goob, who essentially tried to cancel the federation, that kind of stuff, ended up not being what he made it out to be. A lot of the stuff was blown out of proportion. And when I say there were hundreds of thousands of people who were coming and clamoring against the USPA, there were hundreds of thousands of people doing so. And the same thing is taking place to an extent, lesser extent, thank goodness I'd say, to USAPL currently. So it's crazy to see this happening over here. And when you say that people, I don't know, because again, I wasn't part of the situation itself, and it sounds like something which is an unfortunate series of events. But when people basically find themselves in that kind of a situation where perhaps their own actions weren't warranted, and the fact there was some accountability which needed to be done, maybe it was, like I want to say, overdone to an extent, but I don't think the response merited what ended up taking place. Ultimately, to see the end of APU taking place and USAPL Australia showing up and so on and so forth, and then that also shuttering its doors, because right now there's nothing going on in USAPL Australia. It's dead for all intents and purposes. And then them going over to the next IPF affiliate in Australia just to start the whole process over again and whatnot. I don't know. It's the entire thing seems quite futile. It seems like such a waste of time and energy and that kind of stuff. And it's sad to see this happening when frankly people could be sitting down at the table and having conversations with each other instead, and actually sitting down and sifting through the facts. But in the sport of powerlifting, which is a very social media driven sport, you find that what drives the narrative, what drives, I want to say, these groups and whatnot, is group chats, is things in the back and so on and so forth, is social media posts. And if you can't keep up with it, if you're not cool enough, so to speak, that's it. You lose the battle.
That was exactly right. I don't do this. Is my first podcast, so if my voice is shaky, that's me. I love talking. Don't get me wrong. I love the sport of powerlifting.
As do we.
Yeah. And I'm a people person. I'm generally, but I do have that expectation. And just so you know, while I'll stand up for Kelly, I wasn't part of that vote. That wasn't me.
Interesting.
I'm a conflict of interest. So I stepped away. I said, you deal with it. That's part of what the requirement is. A lot of people just thought I ran the APU. But the problem was that I didn't. Well, that's a good thing, but it's a problem now because I got treated the way I did. Every single little thing, this is where democracy was applied, every single little decision that was made didn't always go my way. I would share my experience of what I've seen in the sport. I'd share my experience 100%. As I was saying, I wasn't part of that vote. That's up to them. And if they voted in favour of keeping her, so be it. I got to move on. I got to get over that. And if they don't, well.
So if you had a second to sit down with Kelly Mann right now, right? Because I understand there's quite a bit of contention here, and you had a chance to sit down with those people, what would you say to her? What would you say to them?
I would say that I got a lot to learn from them first, because they are knowledgeable people. I think in return they've got a lot to learn from others. And people have got two ears and one mouth. Ears will absorb so many things that you can apply, and your mouth will speak twice as fast when you don't know that much. So
What would you say to the lifters who turned their back on APU and turned their back on you and decided to basically bash you and the federation? Like if you could sit down with them and have them in a room, and whatnot, have them all there, like what would be your 2 cents? What would be your contribution to them?
tough one, because of course when all of this happened, I did feel that betrayal, because 5 years, 6 years earlier, I sacrificed myself and me life, uh, over $100,000 Australian dollars to step in. I didn't realise that was going to happen. I wasn't planning that, but that's what it ended up happening. But we continued on, and my family really committed. My wife and kids. I had a youngborn at the time, and my wife and me committed to making sure that the platform for the IPF was available. I got my reasons why I made those decisions. I made them based off not off wanting to be in that position, that's for sure. If that was the case, I had 25 years earlier to try to take that position. But what I didn't want to see was, as the sport was growing, because it was growing quite well here in Australia, it's growing quite well throughout the world since classic lifting has been introduced. But those opportunities were there for these people, and I didn't want to see lifters who were at their prime, that short period of time between, I primed when I was probably 38 to 42. That was my prime. Mine was very late. I started late though. Some athletes might be priming at, 30 to 35. And those lifters in Australia that were coming second in the world or third in the world or fourth in the world, could only do better for the next few years while they were growing. And that opportunity was about to be taken from them. And for the humanist in me, I guess maybe it was, let's make sure they got that platform. I did note after a few years that politics are real, and the shit come from one side, but then started coming back from the IPF. And the IPF started throwing shit, and we had an Oceania body, which is our regional body, that tried to sue us as well. That was regards, we ran an Oceania comp. And the worst part of this is that the 11th hour, they tried to withdraw the allegation on the 11th hour. And because we said, hey, that's not true. That's, this is all these are lies, virtually, a whole heap of lies. And then the 11th hour they tried to withdraw. We said, get stuff. We're going to court. I said, we're going to go. I'll spend $100,000 from before. I'll put another 10 grand on the table. I'm fine. And they begged us, and they end up having to pay us money. So I've never heard of an organisation trying to sue someone, then pay them so we did withdraw from court. So that's how bad it was. I later found out that was funded by the IPF.
No way.
So a fucking IPF is funding people to sue us.
Incredible.
Wow, talk about backstab. Holy crap.
Yeah. So all of these things is what added up. We just went, this is just crazy. This
Interesting.
It's lunacy. We've got, no matter what, it is a circus.
It really is, and I'm known for being quite, I want to say, quite the having quite a fiery commentary when it comes down to people doing some dumb stuff and whatnot. But what I've seen with the IPF cannot be described as rational, cannot be described as as intelligent in any way, shape, or form. Just the leadership, it walks into one misstep after the other. It's like, like those cartoons when you see like the cartoon character walk into one rake after the other. This is what's happening over there. But they're not even wincing in pain. They're like not even acknowledging it. Their zone of comfort is making these fuck ups and basically just moving on with it, hoping it gets brushed under the rug. We're finally at a point right now. And also, this is what maybe got me in touch with you, with the whole sleeve gate situation, where it seems like it's all coming home to roost. It seems like right now they're about to, the Pied Piper is coming to town. Between the sleeve gate situation with Hansu suing them, apparently Strength Shop is suing them, whatnot, and a couple of other companies and whatnot, and between the other stuff taking place with Article 14, people have forgotten about Sean Koch.
Yes.
His case is still going on right now. From what I understand, resolution takes place in September, October. And guess what? It's not looking good for the IPF, because apparently when you neglect the case in court, it does not look favorably, doesn't reflect favorably in the eyes of the court and the judge. So all these things will be hitting around at the same time. The IPF will be lucky to exist this time next year is what I'm thinking. And if they continue to exist, they need to really do a great job looking inwards, genuflecting, and removing the cancers that are within them, because this stuff is driving them into the ground. You know, and frankly, if I was in the USAPL right now, one of the other larger federations, I'd be licking my lips. This is an opportunity for them to pounce and to take over the international market, and it's because of no other reason but the IPF stupidity, self-selected stupidity. And you see this happening in your case. You see this happening in Korea. You see this happening in Vietnam. You see it happening in Mexico. You see it happening everywhere, and there's no exception to this. I've yet to see a competent like a governing body of the IPF or governing or a competent affiliate. You have the same even in Norway. Norway's like super pro Article 14 apparently. You know, and it's insane. Like the saner bodies, for example, Switzerland, you know, who actually realized that Article 14 is not legal, they chose to not act out against Sean Koch. You know, they literally chose to not Article 14 him. Who ended up Article 14ing him was actually the IPF proper, the actual federation itself, which is insane behavior. You know, like how are you overstepping? Is this not something that the governing bodies of the nation should be dealing with? It just I don't know. It's just absolutely insane. And I'm sorry you went through all that whatnot. I hope the people who are listening right now get a better idea as to what took place behind the scenes. Get a better idea as to just how much chaos there was back over there, and maybe there's some peace, I guess, which comes with this whole some resolution, you know, and just some clarity, and maybe even to some extent, maybe some vindication for you. That said, Sean, it was a pleasure having you on. Thank you so very much for joining us, whatnot. To the audience out there, hopefully some people in Australia listen to this, whatnot. Where would you like them to reach out to you, Sean? Where could they reach out to you?
I try to stay active on it. Muir.Sean is my Instagram. So, yeah, you can look out.
So if you have any questions and you want to hear from the man himself and you want to basically see exactly what took place behind the scenes and maybe hear his account of the situation, reach out to the man. You've heard to hear from us on the podcast and what on the Squad Plug. Thank you for listening in. Thank you for your time. Until next time. Peace.